outside who were just wondering whether or not they were going to be a little anxious about this, and I just said, everybody wants to hear from you, so not from me. So we'll just make a start straight away. Hannah, I guess you can hear us. Can we just check we can hear you? Yep.
Hi, how are you guys?
Good to meet you, Hannah. Thank you very much for joining us. Can I just introduce by saying we have Hannah, because she's up there. We'll go to her first. Hannah is founder of Hannah for Change, and you can read the bio online. Anish over here, Anish Subramaniam, is a pupil at Robert Gordon's and many other things too. Charlotte is down as a climate activist, but I know she has many other things in her range of interests too. And we have Sophia, who's founder and executive director of Climate Cardinals. Just to make a start on this, the session is really about climate activism, and the school strike movement, of course, was set off a few years ago, and it highlights really how significant youth activism has been in really raising the agenda and actually really starting to get a much broader discussion taking place. And so there's an issue, of course, that hangs in the air, which is the degree to which this is an individual activity and the degree to which all young people are involved. And I've got a series of questions for our panel today, and I'll go through them one by one, and we'll get their opinions on a range of these issues. Okay, so the first of these really is can you give us an example from your own experience of how the power of youth has produced real change in local communities beyond raising awareness? And we'll go to Charlotte first.
So I think the main example of youth-led grassroots change from my own personal experience would be a campaign that my school Eco Club led to make our school the first state school in Scotland to ban single-use plastic. And this all kind of came about from 2 years of constant emails and meetings with the council until eventually they let us ban single-use plastic, but also get recycling bins. And I want to highlight that because I think it's pretty ridiculous that it took 2 years to get a simple resource as a recycling, which is a struggle that many schools are facing in Scotland. But so the council basically agreed to letting this happen, and then a month had passed and there'd been no progress. So what happened was a girl in my eco club, who was about 14 at the time, went through all the bins in the high school and counted 900 plastic bottles that were being sent to the landfill each week in our school alone, which meant over 30,000 each year. So then we also calculated, hypothetically, if all schools in Scotland, high schools that is, not primary schools, were the same capacity and had the same waste, that would mean that over 80 million plastic water bottles were being sent to landfill in high schools in Scotland alone. So what we did was we went and we threatened the council that if they didn't make any change or progress in the next week or 2 weeks, then we'd be outside their headquarters with 900 plastic water bottles with all the local press. And I'm not kidding when I say within a week, there was people at our school measuring where they're going to put the water fountains, where all the recycling bins are going. But I just thought that was a really good example of youth-led change, because if it wasn't for that girl, if it wasn't for the Eco Club members being so persistent, then that would never have come about. And I think it's also really important, schools being such a role for young people to make change, because it's an environment they know so well. They go there 5 hours a day, 6 hours a day, 5 days a week. And just seeing that change and being reminded is very empowering. But I also just wanted to add, this is, me and my sister have created a network called Scottish Eco Clubs Unite for an inspiration for this, which will basically allow eco clubs in Scotland to share their experiences and their struggles, which will fill into a campaign we want to launch to make compulsory environmental actions in all schools implemented by the Scottish Government. So that's the plan.
Well, that's brilliant. It's great. Yeah, good. I think they're not just applauding for your answer; they're applauding for what you did, and I suspect the other three of you are going to get the same level of applause. I would just make the comment that when I was 15 years of age, my friends and I went and did something similar with bales of newspapers, and we dropped them on the school stage in an assembly and said, that's a tree, and that's a tree. Now, back then, that was one school and one group of people. What you've done is extend that to a much broader community, and really very well done. Okay, well, we'll go to Sophia next. Would you like to respond to that question, Sophia? So, giving an example from your own experience of the power of youth producing real change.
Absolutely. So I would love to talk about my nonprofit, Climate Cardinals. It started out as just me and my mom translating climate information into Farsi to teach my relatives in Iran about climate change. And so in high school, my senior year of high school, I decided I wanted to start a nonprofit of lots of young people translating climate resources into different languages. And so we started with a TikTok video. I had one of my friends make a TikTok talking about Climate Cardinals, what our idea was. And in the first day, we reached over 100,000 people and had over 1,000 people sign up to volunteer with us. The average age of the volunteer was just 16 years old. And so now, a year and a half later, we've grown to over 8,000 volunteers in 41 countries. Again, average age of just 15 and a half, actually. And so these young people have translated hundreds of thousands of words of climate information into over 100 languages with no budget, but just purely through volunteer power, and because they truly believe in this cause and they want to make sure that their relatives, their grandparents, their friends can access critical climate resources in the languages that they speak. And so I every day I just sit and I talk with these volunteers, and I think it's so incredible that through the power of social media and with very little resources, we've been able to accomplish so much. And I think it really speaks to the tenacity of youth to make a difference.
Fantastic. Well, I think she deserves a round of applause as well. You know, one of the things I really love about this is that she used her mum as well, because actually that just puts a whole different dimension to it. Well, really well done, you. So thank you. Can we go now to Hannah, please? Hannah, you know what the question is, I think, but yeah, just go ahead and tell us.
Yes, of course. So I love hearing the answers already so far. Locally, I used to live in Atlanta, Georgia, and oftentimes I try and empower and motivate other young people to get involved in the political processes locally, statewide, as well as federally. And it's very often the young people are kind of shut out of the conversation when it comes to legislation, especially around the environment. And I remember in particular, there was a resolution being passed in Fulton County, which is the county where Atlanta is located in Georgia. And the resolution would ban single-use plastics in municipalities. And I remember going to their open floor session where anybody could speak to the council members of the county and speak on behalf of either for the resolution or against the resolution. And I remember there was 2 other youth activists there. We were outnumbered by 3 plastic lobbyists. And us young people were listening to these plastic lobbyists with, their very diplomatic speeches that they were presenting on their side of the story, why we shouldn't ban single-use plastics. And it was all very thoroughly planned out. They knew exactly what they were saying. And I remember the young people just going up to the podium and speaking from the heart, sharing their stories and why it's so important that this legislation is passed. And I remember in particular, I had the final say. I had the very last thought of the day, and I was able to kind of listen and take in what the other people had spoken about, and kind of close it out and talk about and kind of rebuttal what some of the other lobbyists were saying earlier about some misleading statements or even just completely false statements about plastic pollution. I remember in particular them saying that, most of the plastic in the ocean is coming from Asia, so it's not our problem. We don't have to do anything about it. And so I was able to mention that we ship most of our plastic from westernized countries to Asia. And from there, our plastic is ending up in the ocean. So even if it's coming from Asian coastlines, it's still our plastic trash. And so by seeing so many young people, we even were skipping time out of our school day to come and speak on behalf of this resolution, still being outnumbered by plastic lobbyists who, this is their job to speak against resolutions like these. The resolution still passed, and the council members listened to the voice of the young people here in that community that day.
bet you really gave them grief at the end, just to summarize all that. And of course, a lot of the plastic that we shipped back out was stuff that was made in other countries to come here in the first place. So that kind of rounds the circle off, really. Really well done. Thank you. Anish, would you like to follow on with your response to that question? Thank you.
Yeah, so none of my examples are quite international or quite wide-reaching as those mentioned so far, but I think even simple action taken at a local level is still quite important. So when I was quite younger, when I was on the first steps of my climate journey, I set up a climate change challenge for members of my local Hindu group and youth wing. And so there's a quote in the Gita that goes, "Knowledge without action is meaningless." And thus, after having a discussion about technology and its detrimental impact on climate change, I was determined to create like a friendly competition for members to understand and track how their daily activities contribute to climate change. And so examples include, for example, how they travel to work, whether it was by walking, by driving, whether they were like quite thrifty with their water and electricity usage, or whether they were reusing and recycling items. And so at the end of the fortnight, we would all come together and I'd ask them, do you feel that it was quite useful? Did you understand what activities contribute more? Did you understand why this happened? And many people, I think, took away from it, had an understanding that everything that we do plays a role in climate change. It's so ever present in our daily lives that we often just forget about it. And I think these were things that we were all aware of before. It was just the implementation that wasn't there. And I'm glad like the action and then the reasons behind the actions were highlighted. And many people now continue to perform these actions because they understand the reasons behind it. And I'm glad to have had like a small role in that journey for them. And at the same time, the sustainability group in my school have had a huge impact on me as well. So last summer, we actually launched an awareness campaign about plastics, and we were looking at why we should be banning single-use plastics, for example. So we decided to reduce single-use plastics first of all, try and get on that scope, and we launched a competition as well, focused on reducing that, and the results were quite impressive. It was amazing to see so much young people interested in their environment, and that trend continues today. People continue to use less single-use plastic bottles and are more conscious of their environment. So I think these are simple examples, but I guess it shows to young people wherever they are that making change and creating awareness isn't as hard as one may think. Definitely the first step is quite difficult, it's quite challenging, it's quite pushing yourself out of your comfort zone. But as you get involved more and more, it becomes a bit more, I think, fun.
Isn't it just lovely when you can think, I did this, and then all these other people are doing this as well. And it's just that sense from all four of you of an action that you've taken personally that's led to others becoming engaged in that process. So very impressive indeed. So thank you for those examples. And if nothing else, I think we should all go away impressed with what you've done. You deserve at least that round of applause that you each got. So moving on, and here's a thing that I've thought quite a bit about really, which is you've each made a commitment, you've each done something. And so what was it? What key thing was it that made you think, I really need to do something? Me, now need to do something, whatever that thing might be. So what was the thing that flipped you into that way of thinking? And we'll go to Anish first, please.
Of course, yeah. So this journey, I think, has kind of stemmed from my childhood experiences as well as my religious influences. So as a practicing Hindu, I was taught from a young age that our environment is sacred and that it plays an integral role in our lives. And that if we take care of our environment will take care of us. And it's a belief that has been a reality for millennia. And our Vedas and scriptures also emphasize that we should live in harmony with nature. So these were key concepts that were instilled in me throughout my life. And indeed, we were taught that since God is omnipresent, we should respect the divinity within everything. We should see it within everything, within mighty mountains and gushing rivers and all living beings, and that we must protect, respect, and revere them. And our dharma, or sacred duty, again reiterates that we need to respect and protect our environment. And seeing the destruction and devastation inflicted upon our worldly mother was too much for me to bear. It made me realize that it forced me to stand up for something that I truly believe in. And at the same time, I've always had this strong inclination towards helping the poor, as shown through my work with One Against Poverty. And I think it was through this that I learned that actually climate change exacerbates and accelerates poverty. While wealthy, developed nations grew their economy through burning fossil fuels or exploiting the earth, it's going to be the developing world that are going to suffer the consequences. But for what fault of theirs exactly? Well, because the developing world is located between the tropics and in the global south, the effects of climate change are going to be inescapable for them. And so with stronger tornadoes, with relentless flooding, with extensive monsoons, the developing world, it's going to be a difficult period for them. But for what fault of theirs? What did they do to deserve all of this? In our convoluted world, it seems that suffering and bearing the brunt of another person's actions seems to be commonplace, and it's something that I cannot accept and will not tolerate. And I think these two examples kind of summarize the journey and why I'm sitting here today.
That's brilliant, so eloquent. And if I may say, you used the word nature there, and we're in this amazing place. And I've listened to a few debates here this morning, and people haven't been talking, to my mind, quite enough about the natural world and our relationship with it. And I saw a slogan the other day out in the Blue Zone from Nature Scot, which is Scotland's nature agency, and it's climate is nature, nature is climate. And you used another word that's really important to me anyway, which is respect. We can use nature, we can conserve nature, we can manage it, but you only really get to the guts of it when you think about respect, which is the way in which we need to be with each other, and we need to be with the resource that supports us. So thank you very much. That speaks very closely to my heart. So thank you for that. Can I just go to Charlotte next, please?
Yeah, I think a bit like you both, my passion really stemmed from my connection to nature and my relationship growing up in the countryside. And I think being in the countryside my entire childhood was climbing trees and being in forests. So I think I've always had a passion for the environment. And it was really only just when I actually went and inspired me to go out and strike was just learning about the basic reality of what was happening and the climate crisis. I remember my sister showing me the 2018 IPCC report, and that was enough. I didn't know anything really. All I knew was that we only had 10 years to stay within 1.5 degrees, or we'd face a catastrophe socially, economically, ecologically, everything. So it was such a simple message. I didn't really know anything much else, and that inspired me to go out and strike. And when I did go out and strike, there was only a group, about 15 of us, outside the Scottish Parliament. And then in 2 weeks' time, there was about 50 people. And then 2 weeks' time after that, there was literally 5,000 people. And I think that kind of shows, I make that point to show how I think quite a lot of young people are on the same page of they didn't need to know everything that was happening. They just knew the bare reality of what was happening and the climate crisis.
Fantastic, thank you. And we'll go straight on to Sophia.
Yeah, so I had a very specific instance that sparked me becoming a climate activist. So when I was 12 years old, I took a 2-month trip to Iran, which is where both of my parents are from. And when I was there, I was struck by how horrible pollution was. It was so bad I couldn't even see the stars at night. And I started to learn about climate change in the Middle East. I learned that temperatures in the Middle East were rising more than twice the global average. And so I started to have discussions with my relatives about the issue of climate change, realized they knew almost nothing because there was a severe lack of climate resources available in Farsi. I started translating climate resources, and it showed me the power that I was able to have as a young person. But it also showed me that sometimes we as young people doubt our ability to make a difference but so often we are the ones who are informed in the room. We are the ones who are aware of how extingent the crisis is. And so from that experience, I feel like I felt empowered to start volunteering with different grassroots climate organizations, to start organizing strikes in Washington, D.C., which is where I'm originally from, and continued on to where I am now today, continuing to do that work, but within the UN. And so I think that moment I had when I was 12 really showed me that anyone can become a climate activist, and it's just a matter of like witnessing what's around you and seeing how much our planet means to us.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. We'll just go straight on to Hannah, if you would.
Yeah, so just like Charlotte said, some of my earliest memories were spent outdoors, and I love spending time outside, and I've always had such an immense connection towards nature, especially towards the ocean, even though I lived hours away from the nearest coastline. And I've always just had an immense passion for animals as well. So when I was around the age of 10 years old, I heard about a documentary called Plastic Paradise. And that's what first opened my eyes to the issue of plastic pollution. And I could see pretty much how the plastic that we were using in our daily lives, how it was ending up in the ocean, having an immense impact on the underwater ecosystem. And it absolutely broke my heart. And I felt that there was so little that I could do just from an individual level besides, reducing the amount of single-use plastics I was using. And I felt that there was not enough action being done on a much larger level. But I also felt that there was this education gap. Most people around 8 years ago didn't really know what plastic pollution was, let alone how it was happening. And I knew that I had to get involved and help educate other people on this issue, because education and awareness is key to driving change. And that's why most of the panelists here today, we focus on education awareness, providing resources for people to get involved. Because as Sophia said, anybody can be an activist, no matter your age, because once you have the education, the knowledge, and the resources to really get involved, you just need the passion and drive to take action and do something about it. And so that's what all of us on this panel do. We're all passionate. We all care about this issue. We have the resources and we have the drive to take action, and that's what we did. So it's so important to provide that knowledge for people and kind of incite that action so that more of us can get involved.
Well, if I may just draw a couple of these thoughts together, and it seems to me that the four of you have talked about knowledge, knowing stuff, and you've talked about the relationship with people, the people who support you and you support in the way in which you've become active in your own ways, and that the power of nature, the time you spent in it, and in your case, the damage that you've seen to nature. And of course, there's these three elements come together in the way in which you've described your change, in the way in which you've become motivated to do those things. As somebody of a slightly older generation, I just wish we had not done so much to the world, that you were seeing the damage that is out there, and that you were just enjoying this beautiful green world. But maybe you guys will fix that soon enough, though that's not fair to assume you'll have that responsibility. It's ours as well, of course. Okay, if we can move on, I've got another question here, which is, what message would you like to give others who want to make a contribution to addressing the twin climate and biodiversity crises? And Hannah, we'll come back to you first, and away you go.
Perfect. So I always like to direct people with three kind of first steps to get involved. And I think the first step is to find your why. And my why is that I want to live on a planet that doesn't need protecting anymore. And I want to make sure that my younger brother, who just turned 11 years old, he doesn't have to live in a world where he has to become a youth climate activist, where he can enjoy his childhood and not have to worry about the fate of his future. And everybody's why should come from within you, and that'll drive you to achieve something greater than yourself and overcome any obstacles that you do face. And then from there, educate yourself. And I just spoke about, the importance of education, and there's so many resources available. But once you're armed with this knowledge, you can then not only have direct change, but also you can educate other people. And that's so important, to focus on education and awareness, as I said earlier. And from there, that's when you advocate for change. And that's what I love about young people, is that we are so creative and we tap into so many different avenues of advocating for change. We can, participate or lead protests and fundraise or volunteer. We can also share on social media and create art, photography, or film. There's no one set way to get involved in climate activism, and we can use the natural talents that we already have and bring them forward to get involved in any way possible. And that's what I love about our creativity, because there is not one solution towards the climate crisis. And so being able to direct our attention to so many different avenues to educate and inspire change is so important. So that's just a few ways to get involved. And I think that's even just taking time to self-reflect or even journal on, what your why means to you. And there are so many resources available online. I know all of us respectfully work for different organizations or started our own organizations, and there's so much information that we can all provide as well for your help.
Thank you very much. We'll move straight on to Anish.
Yeah, of course. So I think one key message that I wanted to get out today is that change starts from within. And so after speaking to many of my peers and young people from different walks of life, I think a common thing that I noticed is that we're all anxious, we're all worried about the effects of climate change, we're all having that understanding. And it's natural, we are a part of that generation that will be the most affected by climate change. But at the same time, a common theme that I noticed was that many young people either didn't believe that they could make an impact or believe that climate change is something that is out with their control. And to both those things, I would say that's not really true. As I mentioned earlier, small steps can have a huge impact. They can certainly motivate and inspire other people to make an impact. Simple things like walking to school or walking to work or being recycling or getting involved in youth protests, for example, are great ways just to show your voice. But at the same time, that isn't the end of the journey. Instead, that's the beginning. That's a stepping stone for using your voice as a consumer, as a citizen, and as a member of our democracy. And while an individual's actions alone will not prevent, for example, emissions continuing and decreasing the effects of climate change, I think personal action is so important to highlight the importance of these issues to like businesses and policymakers, because they are the ones in power at the moment. So we need to take that step forward and connect the two dots with them. At the same time, though, climate change is not just an issue that should be left to our politicians. It's our world as much as it is theirs, and we all have a part to play. So on that aspect, I feel that we need to make an impact. And as young people, I would say that we need to play a leading role in that journey, because young people, the power of youth is the wealth of the entire world. No section of society can match the idealism, the courage, and the enthusiasm that young people have. And we need to harness that, because young people comprise 1.8 billion people on this planet. We need to harness that. We need to make sure that young people are interested in issues that will affect them now and in the future. So on that aspect, I think it's extremely important. And I'm really glad to have had that opportunity to witness it firsthand. As part of my school's GALE program, I've been able to contact schools from around the world, especially in the global south, from New Zealand to South Africa, listening to the originality of their initiatives, such as recycled notebooks or physically installing solar panels or hydro pumps or creating a waste audit of their school. All amazing initiatives that I wish I had the courage to also implement on a day-to-day basis, and I think I'm gaining inspiration from them. And at the same time, we need to gain inspiration from each other. We need to watch out for each other. We need to listen to each other and make sure that we're all able to make a collective difference.
Fantastic. Okay, Charlotte, on you go.
Well, I think kind of touching on quite a lot of everyone has said about how it can be quite intimidating for young people to try and make a change or like really pursue their aspirations or change that they really want to make. There's often kind of a notion in my head, and I know many other young climate activists, that like you're too mature, you don't know enough, you're not an expert, you need to be more professional, more well-spoken, articulate, and also just being in a school environment, you're always, the adults are always in authority, and now everyone's like, you're the ones who are making the change, you have the power. And it's quite weird coming out of always feeling like you didn't have the power to now you're the ones who have the power and have to make the change. And as well, you've got this notion of kind of feeling like you're immature, you don't know enough. And I think my message would kind of be how you shouldn't change your natural expression, and you shouldn't try and live up to these expectations and pressures of what the expected traits of what it is to be like a leader and to be up here speaking. Like I really struggle sometimes trying to think what I think up here, getting it out of my mouth and trying to articulate how I feel. But I think if you want to be part of this movement, you just have to try and say how you feel, and we need to like support more unconventional ways of leadership. And I think just kind of reinforcing the idea that you can learn just as much from like a 10-year-old than you can from a professional.
Thank you. Thank you, Sophia.
One of my biggest lessons in the climate movement has been that we need to move people, especially young people, but all people, from apathy to action. Because I think 6 years ago, a study said that 40% of adults in the world had never heard of climate change. And I think since then we have made strides in increasing climate awareness. But what I think we're still lacking in is tangible climate action. And so again, I feel like people feel like, yes, I know climate change is real, I know it's a big deal, but what is the role that I can play? And I think that just being proactive, knowing that anyone can make a difference, anyone can be a climate activist. There's no reason why in a year the people who are sitting in the audience can't be on this stage talking about their own experiences. And so I think it really starts with identifying like what is it you're passionate about and what can you do about it, especially on a community level. I think there's always opportunities for people to make their community a better place. You can go volunteer in your local park, you can go pick up litter, you can do what I did, you can start an initiative that's very personal to you, that touches upon like your community, your relatives, your family. And I really think that voting too, it's such a big thing where you can be a conscious consumer, you can go and vote for a climate-friendly candidate. So as much as you can say that you care about climate change, once you make that tangible step of moving from apathy to action and actually putting your feelings into your everyday life and working as a climate activist, I think that's how we can all collectively make a difference.
Again, just a small observation that, a number of your comments, they relate to essentially the way in which there's an expectation that you're, as a pupil at school, you've got certain levels of action that you can take and certain levels of responsibility. But then when you step outside of that and you move into a different world, then you're thought of differently. And a phrase that's always comes to my mind is that we treat young people at school as if they're citizens in waiting. At what point do they become citizens? And of course, that's a ridiculous question, because you're all citizens, we're all citizens, and we need to make sure that we older folk give respect to the fact that you can have, as you said, a 10-year-old who can teach you stuff. I certainly got taught a lot by the young people that I share a house with, and they still teach me to this day. So, no, thank you for those contributions. Those are really incisive. Thank you. So let's move on from the activism side of it to those people out there who make the real decisions, the ones who are through in the protected part of the blue zone that only those and such as those can go to. What message would you give to those politicians, business leaders, and others who are currently making decisions about these issues? And clearly from your activism perspective. So tell it like it should be. And let's start with Sophia, please.
So I can speak to this from a personal perspective. I represent the U.S. as on the United Nations Secretary General's Youth Advisory Group on Climate Change. So I meet regularly with Antonio Guterres, and I give him feedback and advice on his climate strategy. So I realized that as a young person, I have a very unique privilege and a very unique position where I am able to directly engage in dialogue with someone with a lot of power. And from what I've seen from these experiences, it's that this shouldn't be the exception. It should be the rule. And so I think that every single decision maker should commit to meeting with young people regularly and hearing our perspectives, because the reality is that we aren't held back by corporate interests. We have nothing to lose. In fact, we have everything to lose, because we are the ones with the most at stake. Our future is at stake, because I know recent studies have found that our generation is going to suffer 3 times as many climate change, weather-induced disasters as our grandparents. And so we feel the exigency of this crisis in a way that I really feel that the older generation, the world leaders, do not. And so I think my message to the Secretary General and more broadly to all world leaders was that we need to bridge the gap between current climate policy and climate science. Because as much as world leaders can sit there and in the protected zone, in the blue zone, and they can lecture us and say, like, now is the last time to act, we need to act. But then the reality is, then why are you presenting proposals that aren't matching up with what climate scientists say? I heard someone say yesterday that right now, if all the current pledges were to be fulfilled, which I doubt they will be, but even if they were to be fulfilled, we would only limit global warming to 1.8 degrees, which is not where we need to be, to 1.5 degrees of warming. And so the reality of the situation is the science and the policy are not being bridged together. And so I think that that's what world leaders need to be cognizant of. They need to realize that they aren't doing enough and that they need to do better.
Fantastic. As Johan Rockstrom said the other day, 1.5 is not a negotiating position. It's a scientific fact. And I think that's essentially what you were saying. Hannah, would you come in next, please?
I love what Sophia said, and I definitely want to touch on kind of what she opened up with, that we must approach the climate crisis on an intergenerational basis. Because as of right now, our future is in the hands of the people in positions of power. And by the time we are old enough to be in these positions, it'll be far too late. And we know that we are at such a pivotal point in history, and we're relying on the actions being taken today. And young people can do as much as we can to advocate, but it's ultimately up to these people in these positions of power to pull that trigger and to take action on this looming climate crisis. And unfortunately, as young people are tired of meeting with these people and talking about what we want to be seen done, shaking their hands and seeing their agreement, but not seeing any fulfillment of these promises that they're speaking on. So it's so important for whether it's politicians, business leaders, or other adults to not silence young people, but to inspire us and support us, help elevate our voices. They need to encourage us to speak up and truly listen to us when we do, because we have to incorporate youth voices. And it's so important that it isn't just coming from young voices of the young people, or just voices from people in these positions of power, people that are from all across the board, where there's people that are also being directly impacted by the climate crisis, making sure that frontline communities are making their voices heard and have the platform and the resources to speak out on the issues that are directly impacting them.
Thank you. Well, we'll go to Anish next, please.
Of course, yeah. Just as people look up to sports persons or celebrities as role models, sometimes we look up to those in power, our leaders, as a source of guidance or hope that maybe one day this climate crisis will be a part of history, that we won't have to suffer the tremors of climate change anymore. But unfortunately, our world is starved of such decent, ambitious leaders who make climate change their #1 priority. From prime ministers who don't take climate change seriously, to presidents who physically pulled their country out of the Paris Agreement. We don't have this lack of political stability. This constant changing over position is creating unnecessary chaos, which is not the way forward if we are going to meet the 1.5 degree limit. And so I think my message would be that the world is watching our leaders. We need leaders who are collaborative with other leaders across the world, but at the same time making sure that they're going forward in a sustainable way. For example, creating unrealistic emissions targets or greenwashing activities is absolutely of no benefit to anyone. Neither will it increase public trust in them, neither will it actually help the environment. And cheating oneself when there is a planet at stake is something that I absolutely cannot accept at all. And it's quite disappointing when politicians do that, despite us being at COP26, despite this being the last chance saloon for many politicians. And so united we stand, divided we fall. But if we fall, then so too does humanity. And I think the politicians need to understand that. And business leaders need to understand that this is our final frontier in our hope to combat climate change.
Fantastic, thank you. Charlotte, would you like to?
I think just sort of echoing what everyone said, but I think just the way that the world works is not sustainable. And like other climate activists have said, capitalism, which is founded on exploiting people and exploiting the planet, there's no future in that. And we need radical change, like massive change all throughout the world, and tackling all crises that we face right now and all the injustices. And I think we just really just need to reevaluate how we treat the people on the planet.
Thank you. And again, I think one of the things I'm hearing is that, and you mentioned it, Sophia, which is you need to realise that we're fortunate to be parts of democracies, at least all of us here, and that we need to use our votes appropriately and to make sure that politicians know that we will. And you know, my money's on you, actually, in terms of which way you would vote. So, look, we've just got a few minutes left. I would like to invite you, probably in the reverse order again, Charlotte, just if you've got a 1 minute soundbite, anything you want to tell the audience out there that would give us a kind of positive message of hope.
Well, I think just from this entire session, it's obvious that we need to support youth-led initiatives. I think also one of the main things that I was very passionate about in the talk is about sort of unconventional ways of leadership and just sort of seeing people as they are, not expecting too much of them, and just accepting everyone, because the climate crisis is going to affect everyone. So, I'm just going to end on that note.
Great, thank you. So, Sophia, a very quick soundbite.
Well, I would just say that I think that every single person in the world and every single person in this room has the power to make a difference. And so I think that every single person should feel empowered to become a climate activist and to know that they can make a difference. And especially when sometimes we feel like what's going on inside like the World Leader Summit is not what we want to hear, then I think that we as people have the power to make a difference.
Fantastic. And I love the way in which you said people rather than just youth. Thank you. Hannah.
There's a quote that I love from Robert Swan, and he says, "The greatest threat to our planet is the belief that somebody else will save it." And I think for our most daunting environmental challenges like climate change and plastic pollution, we have to act boldly and collectively as one unit. And one of my close friends told me that the weight of the world is not as heavy if we all lift it together. And I think many of us touched on it today, that we feel this movement is very heavy and very weighing on young people right now, because it is very much focused on solely our generation and focusing on these intergenerational conversations and making sure there's youth involvement, but also action from all across the board, that we are all collectively involved, whether it's on an individual basis, like voting with our wallets or voting with our ballots, but also getting involved on a larger level, like participating in campaigns or meeting with your representatives or lobbying for bills.
Thank you. And Anish, quickly, if you would. Thank you.
Yeah, so to people who want to make change, I think the first thing to understand is that presenting about climate change or telling and encouraging people to become climate aware is not enough. It was never enough and it will never be enough, especially in 2021. I think meaningful change and awareness and interest in climate change only arises when we are made to think for ourselves instead of being spoon-fed information or being forced to do something. So this is, I think, something to take into mind when planning activity or planning something that involves a large number of people. Make sure it's impactful.
Thank you. I've just a couple of things to say in the 20 seconds that are left, and it's really this, that you can't but be impressed by these fantastic activists here, whether they be youth or not youth. They're fantastic activists, full stop. And when I first met with them online, I said, there's a thing that occurs to me quite often, which is that we who are a bit older cannot allow ourselves the indulgence, and I'm going to say that word again, it is an indulgence to think that all of the ills of the world that have been caused by previous generations and ours are going to be solved by these young people. But they really, really do know how to make a difference in terms of the way in which we think, and we need to listen to that. So thank you for your time. In great respect and admiration.